Why did Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi succeed? It's a simple question. Neither had an army. Neither had real power. But the answer is simple, and the answer is very significant in the here and now, albeit that it might not necessarily prove popular in certain circles. The primary reason they succeeded was because they were not up against China, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and so on. The two men faced the United States of America and the British Empire, respectively. Had they instead confronted King Leopold of Belgium's colony of Congo, they would have been dead in an instant. We would never have heard of them. They would not be deemed great men of history. The secret of their success lay in the advanced civilization of the peoples they faced. Yes, indeed, the terrible racist American regime, the horrible British imperial power. It was in fact the civility, restraint and liberalism of the civilizations which were being blamed, which ever allowed for Martin Luther King and Gandhi to succeed. I think they will have been aware of that. Now today's generation of protesters wish to emulate these figures, wish to have their own march on Selma, their own march to the sea. They too wish to achieve change. They too complain of brutality, of oppression. But are they still aware that they in fact face a very civil opponent, or do they in fact claim the opposite? Moreover, can one in fact give them what they want? Is their zeal to emulate someone such as Martin Luther King matched with the moral force of a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi? Do they actually have aims? Or is the aim itself to be a movement like that once led by Martin Luther King? Is this really about achieving something, or about sharing in a movement? Is this real, or just a pretense? Now for one, they seem to veer from one course to another pretty quickly. At the time of making this video, it's defund the police. But we've also had statue toppling and demands regarding police brutality. It's very difficult to see how toppling statues of Christopher Columbus combine with demands about policing. One doesn't seem to have a coherent plan, some sort of vision. So one leaps from one idea to another. My view on this is quite clear. The protesters, by and large, are young and inexperienced. They have come to believe that they are part of historical change, that the one event which sparked it, in this case the death of George Floyd while under police arrest in Minneapolis, is the big moment, the fulcrum of history, and that they are the ones who now must act to see through the change which is only waiting to happen. They are seeking to improve the world, but more so to do their duty, so to speak. Just as they have been taught that standing with Martin Luther King would have been the right thing to do back then, now they refuse to be bystanders at this momentous occasion. The problem, of course, being that this is not the momentous occasion that they believe it to be. People die in police custody. Now sure, each such death is one too many, but the reality of our time is that some people will die, and some of those will invariably be black. But we are to believe that this is the moment that changes all. A new generation has seized the moment, and they will not rest until change has come. No change, no peace. But slogans don't help you. And this is where youth is a hindrance. You are much more readily convinced of any occurrence being a world-shattering affair, the instant that sparks a revolution, when you haven't the luxury of having seen it all before. Injustices will occur. Cruel things will happen. Given the spread of cameras, you are much more likely to see them today. But not every image, not every clip can change the world. In that regard, those elders, especially those academics who would lead young people to think that everything will change because such and such happened, have a case to answer. But most of all, the young generation needs to realise that George Floyd's death is not the equivalent of the Iron Curtain falling. Yes, single incidents can lead to revolutions. They can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But they are extremely rare. Moreover, if you want to be party to some grand change, then there needs to be an aim. And I don't really believe that even half the protesters supporting Black Lives Matter really subscribe to the proclaimed anti-capitalist goals of the founders of said organisation. The young are succumbing to the temptation of being agents on the grand stage of history. They will be able to tell their grandchildren in days to come that they were there. Here's the selfie to prove it. They took part in that grand revolution. They brought about a new age. Just like the protagonists at the October Revolution, or the people storming the Bastille in Paris. They marched on Selma. They walked alongside Gandhi on his way to the coast to make salt. More so, they are resisting oppression, standing up to a tyrant in the form of Donald Trump, part of the resistance. You know, like in France against the Nazis. Vive la résistance! Vive de Gaulle! All these things are desperately romantic. but at their heart they are a nonsense. For what is the grand cause here? That a black life matters? Just what would today's Martin Luther King be saying in his grand speech? What would be his dream today, during the presidency immediately succeeding that of a black man? For what cause here would Gandhi be going on hunger strike? To defund the police? To get rid of an elected president? There is no coherent force to this. There is no direction. Yes, there is political discontent, but this political discontent centres largely on having lost elections. Donald Trump, Brexit, Boris Johnson, the loss of the white working class vote. But what we are seeing in the unrest is that frustration being channeled into some desire to be part of a civil rights movement and a grand breakthrough in equality, another great leap forward for mankind. But of course, the question has to be again and again, what are the differences in rights against which they are protesting? And if there are no such inequalities in actual law, what are the routine atrocities we are still witnessing? So, for example, how many lynchings has one witnessed in the US over the last 50 years, always remembering it's 2020? Better yet, how many have there been in Britain? Ever? Are police forces in either country going on regular turkey shoots for black people? Is the minority suffering regular beatings at the hands of the majority? Are they being prevented from voting or from standing for office? Just what is it? Really, it is poverty and violence. Crime rates, incarceration, dependence on welfare, poor education, a self-destructive culture. It's not a simple case of people being overtly oppressed. No, the accusation is that it's much more subtle and hidden. Thus we get talk of systemic oppression. And this unseen oppression, which leads to this difference in outcome for this minority, that must end, we are told. But this systemic oppression consists of no specific constituent parts. It is merely apparent through the difference in outcomes. It must be there because of the outcomes. But this means, even if you were given the power to stop it, how would you do so? How could you put an end to a process that exists only in its outcome? Now we know the only way you could even attempt to do this is mainly by wealth redistribution and so on, and during some prolonged transition period most likely also some strangely tilted justice system, all to achieve different outcomes from the ones we have now. But are the protesters even asking for that? Are they even asking for anything, really? Not from what I can tell. Nothing coherent. They are much more interested in making vague demands such as fairness or justice. In essence, they want that which is wrong to end and that which is right to begin. And remember, no change, no peace. I know this sounds harsh or even dismissive, but I really think they are largely, unwittingly, playing at being civil rights activists. One might say it is the ultimate extension of identity politics. Think trans people choosing their sexual identity. What do these people choose to be? They choose to be civil rights protesters. Do they really have a coherent message, coherent demands, or a moral position? Not really. They are all over the place, and nowhere in particular. One is, at least for now, congealing around demands regarding police funding, but there is almost an element of despair to that. It's as though they are becoming aware of their having nowhere to go with this, because they themselves have no real aim. Because the real aim is for them to embrace the identity of the good guys. They are the heroes in this, because they have chosen to be so. Like so much in social justice politics, reality doesn't enter into it. One is pursuing an image. It's a product. The ultimate accessory, if you like. The heroic persona. I will myself to be the civil rights marcher. What are my demands? Well, that's not really that important. But I demand change and I demand it now. I am prepared to fight for this. We are legion. We will stop at nothing. This vile system will be brought low by someone who does, well, something. This is a matter of civil rights, just like back then with Martin Luther King. This is a noble cause, of which I am a part. Standing up to wickedness, systemic wickedness, whiteness, police brutality, poverty, the slavery of the past, healthcare, statues, anti-immigration, something or other. Behind it, there is no depth. There is no soul to this. Or as I would put it, there were two musical voices closely associated with the 1960s civil rights movement around Martin Luther King. One was a young Aretha Franklin, loud, brash, and brilliant. But the other was Mahalia Jackson, deep, soulful, and profound. Hers truly was the voice of the people, whereas Aretha represented the young generation. Listen to the two, you will see what I mean. Both women sang at Martin Luther King's funeral. Mahalia sang in front of 250,000 before his I Had a Dream speech. What is my point? well, today's movement has a lot of Aretha Franklin. Well, if that. I'm being very charitable here, but it has no Mahalia Jackson. It has no dignity. It has no moral strength. It does not come from a place of such suffering as that woman will have seen to produce a voice such as hers. No, today's movement merely stems from a place of wanting to be seen to be someone who demands something. At heart, it is a pretence. I know people will accuse me of being dismissive, but the more of this I have seen, the less I think Martin Luther King and Gandhi would have made of this. Because all they would see are people trying to imitate them, trying, dare I use that word, to appropriate some of their image. Rebels without a cause, seeking to find a purpose in claiming to be their heirs, both politically and spiritually. But Black Lives Matter are no rightful heirs to a man such as Martin Luther King. They are pretenders to that throne, and their movement is driven by a desire to be activists, rather than by the resolve to see an injustice addressed. The protesting, the activism is not a means, but an end in itself. We are watching a performance, but one without a script. That is all from the Sabbath Pass for now. Thank you very much, and goodbye.